Students, welcome to my class on candidiasis and oral lesions of systemic mycosis. At the outset, let me generally tell you that fungal infections are the most underdiagnosed infections out of all the microbes. The reason is that we usually do not have a high index of suspicion in most of our cases. Systemic mycotic fungal infections are usually caused by a class of fungi which are called as dimorphic fungi. The uniqueness of the dimorphic fungi lies in the fact that it can be demonstrated or it exists in two forms. Inside the body or in vivo, it usually exists as the yeast form, and outside the body, in the environment, it usually exists as the mold form. So, whenever you diagnose a systemic fungal infection, it is very crucial for your lab to demonstrate the conversion of the dimorphic fungi from the yeast phase to the mold phase using the appropriate mycological techniques. This is very important because there are a lot of similar looking fungi which exist in the morphologies similar to the yeast and the mold forms of the dimorphic fungi. That is why I told you, dear students, that whenever we see a dental lesion, okay, be it an abscess or an ulcer or a nodule, it could very well be a dimorphic fungal or a systemic fungal infection. This very crucial diagnosis may go underreported or unnoticed in your routine clinical practice. So, if I have to say in one word, the commonest oral lesions that are caused by systemic fungal infections usually appear in the form of a nodule, ulcer, or an abscess. Therefore, please do not neglect these findings when you encounter them in your routine dental clinical examination. And also, I request all of you to have a very broad mind to consider all the differential diagnosis of a possible nodule, an ulcer, or an abscess. I mean to say that you should also start thinking of the possibility of this your patient having a systemic fungal infection, because the primaries are usually situated in the lungs, and what you see as an oral lesion may represent the disseminated manifestation of a systemic fungal infection. So, unless and until you have a very high index of suspicion, I repeat, you may misdiagnose or you may underreport the occurrence of such dimorphic fungal infections. And I personally strongly believe that such dimorphic fungal infections are quite common in India. So, the basic concept of a systemic fungal infection is that usually the primaries or the initiating lesions of a systemic fungal infection is located in one organs or one organ system. From the primary site of infection, the fungal hyphae or the spherules or the fungal cells or the arthrospores spread either via the blood vessels or via the lymphatic channels, and they get established in the secondary sites. So always please remember that in every dimorphic fungal infection there will be a primary site of infection and there will be a secondary site of infection, and most of the oral lesions are usually the secondary site, are usually seen as a secondary site lesion rather than the primary site lesion. So let us now see each and every dimorphic fungal infection that are usually encountered. Most of these dimorphic fungal infections are caused by dimorphic fungi. The first infection that we will be learning about is called as histoplasmosis. Histoplasmosis is caused by a dimorphic fungi called as Histoplasma capsulatum. This particular disease or infection is also called as Darling's disease because it was discovered by Samuel Taylor Darling in the year 1905. Now, as the name itself suggests, histo means histiocytes. This particular fungi usually resides within the histiocytes, which are present as a part of the reticuloendothelial system. So this fungi is usually seen intracellularly in the histiocytes. Plasma denotes the resemblance of this particular fungi to Plasmodium. Capsulatum means that this fungus has a capsule. To be very frank, the word capsulatum is a misnomer because when this fungi was initially discovered, it was thought to contain a capsule. But later on, due to the evolution of diagnostic mycological modalities, it has been proven that this so-called capsule is nothing but a halo around the cells. Now there are 3 species of histoplasma which causes histoplasmosis. The first species is the commonest and it is called as Histoplasma capsulatum, and it causes the classical variety of histoplasmosis. There are 2 other species, one called as Histoplasma duboisi, which causes African histoplasmosis, and Histoplasma farciminosum, which causes epizootic histoplasmosis. Epi means epidemic, zoo means animal. So this particular species, farciminosum, causes an epidemic infection in the animals. So therefore, it is not considered in detail in this particular class. Similarly, Histoplasma duboisi is primarily confined to the African subcontinent and therefore will not be considered in today's class. So, if you look at the prevalence of the classical histoplasmosis, it is usually inferred that this fungal infection is present along the river beds of the Ohio and Mississippi river valleys in the United States. Please don't think that it is restricted only to the US. Very recently, it has also been found to occur in the region of West Bengal along the Ganga River. The reason why it is predominantly seen only in the river bank is because of the fact that this fungus usually inhabits the humid and the acidic soil which contain a large amount of nitrogen due to the bird droppings or the bat droppings. Histoplasmosis is acquired due to the inhalation of spores which circulate in the air after the contaminated soil is disturbed. Once the spores enter or they are inhaled, they travel to the lungs and establish themselves in the alveolar spaces. Usually, in the immunocompetent individuals, a quick reaction is mounted and the infection is prevented from progressing by the alveolar macrophages. But in certain immunodeficient individuals, these intracellular yeast forms of the fungi travel to the lymph nodes and spread to the other parts of the body through the bloodstream. Majority of the infected people show strong cell-mediated immune response within 2 weeks, and granulomas are formed which later get healed with fibrosis and calcification. Therefore, this particular infection can strongly mimic tuberculosis because of the granulomatous nature of the reaction in the lungs. But unlike tuberculosis, histoplasmosis once healed rarely reactivates. And also there is calcification seen in the region of the granuloma formation. Classically, histoplasmosis usually appears as a pulmonary manifestation. You have an acute form and you have a chronic form. The acute form usually presents with mild flu-like illness. Pulmonary infiltrates in the chest X-ray with hilar or mediastinal lymphadenopathy, whereas the chronic cavitary form is usually seen in smokers with underlying structural lung disease. So, pulmonary form is the primary site of infection. Secondarily, it may also be affecting the skin and cause several primary cutaneous histoplasmosis reactions. These skin eruptions are usually appearing in the form of a nodule or an indurated ulcer at the site of inoculation with localized lymphadenopathy. Even in the mouth also, the histoplasmosis skin lesions or the oral lesions in the histoplasmosis usually appear in the form of a nodule. So that is why I told you, my friends, what may seem as a nodule or a simple infection might be something sinister. So therefore we should always look for it whenever we visualize such dental lesions. Disseminated histoplasmosis is usually seen in the brain, in the heart, and also in the liver. If the cell-mediated immunity is very low, these sites are usually affected. Please remember a very important fact that out of the oral, pulmonary, and the disseminated lesions of histoplasmosis, in Indian patients, particularly oral lesions are seen. So, my dear friends, I re-emphasize once again that whenever you see a nodule inside the oral cavity, please always have a very strong index of suspicion for oral histoplasmosis, because only with your suspicion can we diagnose as mycologist in the clinical laboratory. Usually we obtain the samples according to the site of the infection. The usual samples are sputum, bone marrow, lymph node, peripheral blood smear. We inoculate the samples on Sabarot's dextrose agar or SDA, and we incubate the samples at two temperatures, 37 degrees and 28 degrees Celsius, in order to demonstrate both the yeast forms and the mold forms. Now, what you're seeing to the right of your slide are morphological forms which are called as tuberculate macroconidia with typical thick walls and finger-like projection, which is a very characteristic feature of this fungus. Conidia refers to asexual propagule and macro refers to the size of the conidia. Just like you have tuberculate macroconidia, microconidia are also seen at 25 degrees Celsius, but they are much more smaller, thinner, and smooth walled. Culture is definitely the gold standard method of diagnosis. At 37 degrees Celsius, these mold forms gets converted into creamy white yeast-like colonies. Special media such as Kelly's media are usually employed to visualize these forms. Now, if you compare the classical and the African variety of histoplasmosis, you will notice that the African variety of histoplasmosis are usually seen to be associated with subcutaneous and bone lesions rather than the pulmonary lesions. Moreover, the spores in the case of African histoplasmosis usually appears pear-shaped and are usually clustered within the giant cells and histiocytes. The oral lesions are usually associated with the classical form rather than the African histoplasmosis. And histoplasmosis is usually treated with liposomal amphotericin B. Itraconazole is recommended for chronic cavitary pulmonary histoplasmosis. We now come to the next type of fungal infection, which is called as blastomycosis. As this particular infection is usually seen in the North American continent, it is also called as North American blastomycosis or Chicago disease or Gilchrist disease. This fungal infection is caused by a dimorphic fungus called as Blastomyces dermatitidis. Please remember, my dear students, that the tissue reaction for all these dimorphic infections are granulomatous or pyogranulomatous in nature. So, in the case of blastomycosis, again, the primary site of infection is usually seen in the lungs, and the secondary or the disseminated infections are seen in the bone, in the skin, and the genitourinary system. In the bone, usually it causes osteomyelitis with punched out lesions. In about 40% of AIDS patients, CNS or the central nervous system involvement has also been reported. Brain abscess is the usual presentation, followed by spinal epidural abscess and meningitis. Again, like histoplasmosis, this infection is also seen along the river banks of Ohio and Mississippi River valleys. This is the skin lesions that are visualized in blastomyces dermatitidis infections. You can see that this skin lesions usually begin to appear as a nodule, and slowly it enlarges in size and becomes vesicular initially. Later on, the vesicular fluid is pent up inside the lesion, and this vesicle breaks to yield a necrotic ulcer with a sloughed off base. Blastomycosis is usually diagnosed with the help of a sputum, a bronchoalveolar lavage or a ball sample obtained from the lungs, abscess, pus, or biopsies. Again, on Sabarod's dextrose agar, this particular fungi, Blastomyces dermatitidis, is seen as downy, fluffy white to tan colonies. If you do a H&E staining, you will see a classical feature which is called as the broad-based budding yeast cells. Okay, my friends, please remember, in Candida you usually see narrow-based budding yeast cells, but in blastomyces and in cryptococcosis you usually see broad-based budding yeast cells. These budding broad-based yeast cells have a thick-walled double-contoured cell wall. Usually, blastomycosis is also treated with liposomal amphotericin B, like histoplasmosis, and itraconazole can be given in immunocompetent individuals with mild pulmonary or non-central nervous system extrapulmonary infections. Paracoccidioidomycosis is our next systemic fungal infection. Just like blasto is called as North American, paracocci is usually also called as South American blastomycosis because it is usually seen in the countries, Latin American countries like Brazil. So if there are any football fans out there, Brazilian football fans, you may also be wish to remember paracoccidioidomycosis or associate this infection with Brazil along with football. This particular infection is caused by a dimorphic fungi called as Paracoccidioides immitis. Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. Okay, I'll just repeat once again. Paracoccidioidomycosis is caused by Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. Again, like histo and blasto, this tissue reaction usually appears in the form of a granulomatous lesion. The primary site of infection is in the lung, and the disseminated infections are usually seen in the mucosa, skin, lymph nodes, and internal organs. Here, please remember that as we are dealing with oral systemic lesions, I wish to emphasize here that classical manifestation or the classical oral manifestation of paracoccidioidomycosis is the buccal granuloma. A classical triad of pulmonary, skin, and oral lesions are the highlight clinical features. The acute form of this infection is seen in the young adults under 30 years of age, and the chronic form is usually seen in older men, and mind you, it accounts for 90% of the cases. Paracoccidioidomycosis is diagnosed again with the help of the relevant samples affecting the related to the site of their affection. So, if you take Gomori methenamine silver staining, and if you do a GMS staining on the samples or on the colonies, you will note that there are rounded refractile yeast cells with multipolar budding. If you look very closely at these multipolar budding yeast cells, you will realize that they closely resemble the Mariner's wheel. So therefore, it is also called as a Mariner's wheel or a pilot wheel appearance. If you take a cross section of this particular yeast, the appearance, you will note that it appears as a Mickey Mouse. Okay, you can see the small ears of the Mickey Mouse. So the appearance of the yeast forms of this particular infection, Paracoccidioides brasiliensis, resemble that of a pilot wheel or a mariner wheel appearance or a Mickey Mouse appearance. Only the name may sound funny, but the infection is not. On Sabrot's dextrose agar, the yeast forms appear as soft, off-white, cream-colored, wrinkled, rough and pasty colonies. Later on, as the colony ages, the colonies become more wrinkled in appearance. Itraconazole is the treatment of choice for this infection, whereas amphotericin B is recommended for seriously ill patients. Next, we come to coccidioidomycosis. Coccidioidomycosis is one of the most virulent of all the lesions of the systemic fungal infections. This is caused by the fungus Coccidioides immitis. Im means not, mitis means mind. So, my friends, please remember that Coccidioides immitis infections are really not that mild. Primary infections are seen in lungs, and in chronic cases, the fungi or the hyphae spread through these blood vessels and cause fatal skin granulomas. This particular infection is usually also called as desert rheumatism or California fever or valley fever, and it is usually seen in the arid and the semi-arid regions of the deserts. Coccidioidomycosis is transmitted by the inhalation of the arthroconidia, and in lungs they become enlarged and rounded and develop internal septations to form a large sac-like structure called as spherules. Inside the spherules there are numerous endospores, and once the spherules rupture they release a lot of endospores that disseminate and develop into new spherules. So therefore, if I open a plate of coccidioides culture in my lab, these arthrospores are potentially very dangerous, and this infection can also be seen in immunocompetent individuals. So therefore, I have to cordon off an area of the radius of at least 5 kilometers around my lab. The entire area has to be shut off, and that is why, because of its dangerous implications, Coccidioides immitis is also utilized for illegal purposes and also is employed for biological warfare, and it is classified as a potential bioterror agent. This is how a person with a terminal stage of this illness looks like. So as you can see, this particular infection is very, very dangerous. Skin lesions range from rashes or erythema nodosum to disseminated convalescent lesions. These lesions appear secondary to pulmonary infection. If you look at the clinical course of this illness, 40% of patients develop flu-like symptoms, out of which 32% of them become asymptomatic, okay, and the remaining 8% of the people develop cavitations in their lungs, leading to pericarditis also. Out of this percentage of people, 4% of them progress to the chronic and the progressive stages of the infections, leading to the involvement of the lungs and also the meninges. As I mentioned, lab diagnosis is obtained by confirmed by taking specimens like sputum, CSF and bronchoalveolar lavage. And if you do a Gomori methenamine silver or a periodic acid shift stain, you will observe the yeast forms as doubly thick refractile walls with spherules surrounded by granulomatous reaction. So this particular image which I have highlighted here, this is the spherule which contains numerous spores. The yeast phase is usually fragmented as arthrospores. So these are the arthrospores, and typically if you see, these arthrospores are rectangular in shape and they are alternating in nature. So sometimes we also mention these arthrospores as alternating arthroconidia. On the Sabrot's dextrose agar, we see innocent looking swede-like greyish white to tan colonies. These are the spherules further enlarged for your better visualization under the GMS stain. And these are the innocent looking colonies of coccidioidomycosis, which is a potential bioterror agent. This completes the section on the oral lesions of systemic mycotic fungal infection. If I have to summarize once again, all the systemic dimorphic fungal infections have a primary site of infection from where they invade or spread to the secondary sites via the blood vessels and the lymphatics. Most of the fungal infections you see tissue reactions in the form of granulomas or pyogranulomas, and the treatment is usually by amphotericin B and itraconazole. We now come to one of the very important fungal infections which you will be encountering as a dentist in your day-to-day practice. This is called as candidiasis or moniliasis because earlier Candida used to be classified under the genus Monilia. Now this genus no longer exists, so we still say it is candidiasis. Candidiasis is caused by Candida species. It is an endogenous opportunistic pathogen. My friends, please remember, Candida is a normal commensal flora usually situated in the mouth, in the genital tract, and sometimes also on the skin. Several species of Candida exist which can cause this infection. Initially, majority of the infections were thought to be caused by Candida albicans, and as the time progressed and as the lab techniques became more and more refined, now we know that not only albicans, there are several non-albican species also involved in the candidiasis. In fact, in certain institutions or in certain geographical locations, the infections caused by non-albicans Candida predominates over the albicans Candida. So, I have mentioned here a few of the very important species of Candida. They are Candida albicans, tropicalis, Candida krusei, Candida parapsilosis, Candida guillermondi, Candida glabrata, Candida dubliniensis, and the Indian name Candida vishwanathi, named after Dr. Vishwanathan, who was the director of the Vallabhbhai Patel Chest Institute in New Delhi. Now, why are we more concerned about all these species? The reason is because there are some Candida species which are intrinsically resistant to the fluconazole or the azole class of antifungal agents. These intrinsically resistant Candida species are Candida krusei and Candida glabrata. Very recently, Candida auris infections have been increasingly reported. The Candida auris infection is also very notorious for its inherent resistance to fluconazole. The alarming spread of infection of this new species, Candida auris, is so much so that WHO has recognized this species as one of the pandemics to watch out for in the near future. Candidiasis usually causes opportunistic infections. And opportunistic infections, as you know, are usually seen in those situations which are associated with lowered immune responses. So, the predisposing factors are predominantly diabetes, burns, natural states like infancy, elderly, and pregnancy, change in the epithelial surfaces due to moisture and trauma, AIDS, zinc and iron deficiency, and I am reserving this particular feature, that is post antibiotic change, as the last but not the least, because nowadays antibiotics are being rampantly misused and abused so much by the clinicians that the normal the microbial flora in our human body is eliminated by such usage. This gives a very good opportunity for opportunistic commensal fungi like Candida to grow, germinate, and cause infections. There are several virulence factors for candidiasis. Candidas usually bind to the skin and mucosa by virulence factors called as adhesins. There are enzymes like aspartyl proteinases and serine proteinase which help in tissue invasion. Interestingly, Candida albicans appears in three morphological forms. They are yeast form, also called as blastospores, pseudohyphae, and true hyphae. This unique ability of Candida to switch between these three phenotypes, yeast, pseudohyphae, and true hyphae, is called as phenotypic switching. As this is a physical transformation, this enables the adaptation of the fungi to changing host conditions and thereby assist the fungus in evading the host defense systems. The commonest oral lesion caused by Candida is called as the oral candidiasis or the oropharyngeal candidiasis. It is commonly called as oral thrush. A patient with oral thrush presents to you as having white, adherent, painless patches in the mouth. Often they also complain of metallic taste. Another very common manifestation of mucosal candidiasis is the vulvovaginitis, characterized by pruritus, pain, and curdy vaginal discharge. Esophageal candidiasis and angular stomatitis, that is presence of the lesions in the edge of the mouth, is also seen. Denture stomatitis is also commonly associated with oral candidiasis. Apart from mucosal or oral manifestations, Candida can also cause chronic mucocutaneous lesions, especially in infants and children with deficient cell-mediated immunity. These lesions involve the hair, nail, skin, and mucous membrane, and it is associated with other endocrine abnormalities like hypothyroidism and hypoadrenalism. Cutaneous manifestations are usually seen as paronychia, that is involving the interface of the nail and the skin, and also sometimes it can cause onychomycosis, which is the fungal infection of the nail. Ocular candidiasis is also seen affecting the eye, where you see a reddish change of the conjunctival mucosa along with a discharge, a serous discharge. Cutaneous candidiasis are also seen in the form of a generalized eruption, or it can be seen as pustular rashes. Usually it is seen either around the oral area, or it can also be seen in the diapers due to consistent or prolonged use of diapers in the infants. And therefore it is called as diaper candidiasis. Systemic manifestations ranging from urinary tract infection, lung infection, heart infections in the form of endo and pericarditis, brain infections causing meningitis, blood infections, septicemia, and bone and skin infections like arthritis and osteomyelitis are also a common feature. Candida can also cause allergic reaction similar to that of the one caused by the dermatophytes. So, how do we diagnose candidiasis? This is also a very important learning point for today's class. Now, how do you collect specimens? Usually, we collect specimens depending on the site of the infection. So, your whitish mucosal patch that you see in the oral thrush patients can be one of the excellent samples for diagnosing candida, oral candida infections. You can also take skin scrapings if it is seen periorally, and also the nail scrapings, sputum and body fluids can be taken depending on the site of infection. As soon as we receive the sample in the lab, we initially do what is called as the potassium hydroxide or the KOH mount. In the KOH mount, candida appears as yeast cells and pseudohyphae. We then culture the organism on Sabarot's dextrose agar. The colonies are typically described as cream colored pasty colonies. So please remember this word pasty. Okay. So Sabarot's dextrose agar, usually we see cream colored pasty colonies. Colonies usually appear within 24 hours. If you do a gram staining, we will see gram positive oval budding yeast cells with pseudohyphae. Please mention the entire name whenever you write the lab diagnosis of candida. It can be easily remembered as the mnemonic GPOBYC, gram positive oval budding yeast cells with pseudohyphae. Now at this juncture, it is very important for you to understand the difference between a true hyphae and a pseudohyphae. There are three major differences. In the case of a pseudohyphae, the septa appears constricted, but in the true hyphae, there is no constriction of the septa. The origin of branches in the pseudohyphae are also constricted and septate, but in the true hyphae, there is no constriction or septa present. So this is your true hyphae and this is your pseudohyphae. So there will be a pinching at the point of origin. Okay, you can see several pseudohyphae here. The other pseudohyphae can be seen in this particular area. Okay, here in this particular area, down here. Here. Okay. Please remember, the pseudohyphae usually grows by budding. The pseudohyphae usually grows by budding, but the true hyphae grows by apical elongation. I repeat once again the differences between a true hyphae and a pseudo hyphae. The pseudo hyphae will be constricted at the point of origin and they will appear septate. They grow by budding, whereas a true hyphae will not be constricted at the point of origin. There will not be any septum. The cell walls will be parallel to each other and they grow by apical elongation. I hope you have understood now the differences. Now, once we isolate the colonies, we also need to demonstrate spores called as chlamydospores on a medium called as cornmeal agar. Cornmeal agar is a nutritionally deficient medium, and these chlamydospores appear as doubly refractile thick-walled cells, usually seen terminally at the end of the hyphae. Please remember that usually Candida albicans produces these chlamydospores along with Candida dubliniensis. So a very important test to differentiate both these species is by growing at 45 degrees Celsius. Candida albicans grows at 45 degrees Celsius, but Candida dubliniensis does not grow at 45 degrees Celsius. Very important test that is done for species identification, especially to differentiate between albicans and non-albican species, is called as the germ tube test. A germ tube is nothing but a long tube-like projection that is extending from the yeast cell. So this long tube-like projection extending from the yeast cell is called as germ tube. It is also referred to as Reynolds broad phenomenon. Please keep this in mind. Germ tube test is also called as the Reynolds broad phenomenon. Germ tubes are formed when colonies mixed with human or sheep serum are incubated for 2 hours. And when we examine the wet mount preparation under microscopes, we see this apical elongation. Okay, this apical elongation is seen. So germ tubes are usually seen again with Candida albicans and Candida dubliniensis. Therefore, to differentiate both of them, we have to do a temperature growth at 45 degrees test. Candida dubliniensis will not grow, but albicans will grow at 45 degrees. Along with the lactophenol cotton blue staining method, you can also do certain carbohydrate fermentation test and assimilation test to differentiate between the various non-albican species. Okay, here we test the ability of the organism to ferment different sugars. The availability of a chrome agar medium, CHROM, chrome agar medium, has greatly simplified our diagnosis of candidal infections. We also have chrome agar medium in our lab, and if you inoculate the colonies, suspected Candida colonies onto this medium, there is a metabolic substrate present in this medium, and the yeast cells will react and metabolize these substrates and will yield a color depending on the type of the metabolism. So we can easily identify the different species of Candida based on the color that they produce on the chrome agar. Candida albicans, please remember, Candida albicans produces green colored colonies. Candida tropicalis produces blue colored colonies. Candida glabrata produces moist pink colored colonies. Why I am specifying moist is because even Candida krusei will also produce pink colonies, but in krusei the colonies will appear as dry pink colonies. So Candida glabrata moist pink colonies, Candida krusei dry pink colonies. Candida parapsilosis usually appears as whitish or cream colored colonies. I was talking to you about Candida auris. Now if you culture it on the chrome agar, usually we see pink colored colonies. So in our lab, when we see pink colored colonies, we always have a differential diagnosis of krusei, glabrata and Candida auris. Serological and molecular testing methods are also available for candidiasis. Though it is the serological tests are less employed, molecular tests such as PCR is usually widely employed for species identification. There is a specific conserved region called as ITS or internal transcribed spacer region 1 and ITS 2. So these are the two conserved regions which are usually examined during molecular testing to identify the species. Usually, as candidiasis is an immunocompromised infection, we always look for the underlying cause of this infection and treat that infection first. For mucosal candidiasis, nystatin, systemic candidiasis, azoles and amphotericin B, and cytokine therapy in the form of granulocyte monocyte colony stimulating factors is also employed to treat these infections. Please remember, Candida glabrata and Candida krusei exhibit intrinsic or innate resistance to azoles. So if you try to treat all the Candida infections with azoles, you will not achieve a successful outcome. Therefore, whenever a lab identifies a Candida isolate, as a doctor, we should recommend or we should request for an antifungal susceptibility testing method. Earlier, we were happy with just identifying Candida albicans and non-albicans, but because of the complexities of management of candidiasis patients, we now go for specific species identification and detection of drug resistance. So with this, we have completed today's class. Thank you for your patient hearing.